So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our session together with PatsNet. We're very honored to have them with us, walking us through live stream here on YouTube as well. So, if you're joining us through YouTube, please do not forget that you're able to chat with our speakers, John, live on YouTube. So don't miss that out. And today, wanted to have them to share with us how business could still be driven by IP strategy. So, John, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and welcome everyone. Today's session is going to focus on how to adapt the business models, really focusing on big data and IP big data. And the hope is that you'll be able to learn something new today and something to expand out your ability to innovate as well. So a little introduction to myself. I'm the Director of Solution Consulting at PatsNet. I've been here for just over 3 years, and I've been working with users and customers in various different industries, from small organizations to big organizations as well. And my goal is to take this experience and kind of extrapolate out on how we can use big data to do more sustainable innovation, in a sense of using less resources to innovate quicker, not necessarily sustainable in a sense of green innovation as well. This is open for questions as well, so you can ask questions via Zoom or via YouTube, and look forward to answering those at the end of the call. So we're going to evaluate the concept of connected innovation intelligence, and then 5 key steps needed to build the strategy around data-driven innovation as well. So what are the 5 questions that we need to think about and answer specifically? The first, especially for more legal and IP attendees, is how do we satisfy the desire to have more information with the risk associated with IP? And how many projects and types of innovation do we pursue as an organization? Also, we're going to be looking towards the attitude to that desired risk level the company is willing to take. What are the objectives and the desired business outcomes as well? And penultimately, the responsibility for reporting against the metrics and collaborating with other teams. And then finally, what methodology is best suited for the desired outcomes, and how can connected innovation intelligence help? This becomes all more poignant when we consider how the world of innovation is changing in the wake of the knowledge economy and the availability of more data and information than ever before. And then hopefully we'll be able, by the end of this, get a better understanding of what it is that I mean by all this. So let's get started. How do we satisfy the desire to have more information? And how many projects and what types of innovation should an organization focus on as well? Not all data is the same. So how do we satisfy this desire for the good? So the good is obviously that there's more data than before, but the bad is that how do we separate the noise? And the ugly is that, are we going to do that manually or not? So when we look at data, R&D engineering is going to look at a different view than IP is going to look at. So IP is going to be looking more specifically, tangibly at individual documents and individual intellectual property to be protected, when R&D maybe wants to get a more macro view and understanding what's occurring in the space. So when this data is generalized, it's really impactful to understand trends, new entrants, disruptive tech. But on the other hand, it opens you up to the more legal risks, such as treble damages, willful infringement, and other. And R&D is usually not aware of this risk. So it's usually on the legal teams to ensure governance. And sometimes legacy structures, such as zero access to IP for non-legal teams, make today's big data-led innovation difficult, because it really does put much more credence and work onto these legal teams or the owners of IP on this side and the legacy structures, when everybody on the other side is asking for more detail. And in the end, they're going to start jumping onto unsecure or open public platforms that could really expose some ideas that are being worked at within the organization. So next generation systems and internal structure, these are some screenshots from PatsNet, but what we are enabling to do is the ability to assign patents for review, for example, and keep everything in one place. So you're not sending out Excel files that could be tagged and annotated and then used within discovery to potentially prove willful infringement, but also high level analytics off of this data set it's really, really important to not only report into board levels to spot trends or compare your portfolio to your competitors, but also on an engineering level to spot in specific nuances that are occurring in the technology with their expertise. So on one hand, we have an individual patent document, but on the other hand, within each individual patent document, there could be anywhere from 50 to 90 different data points. And how can we analyze this in a high end? And that's all going to drive into this data-driven innovation that we're going to be covering in today's session. So not in all innovation is the same. When we think of innovation in the vernacular, we're really usually referring to types of innovation known as radical or disruptive. However, innovation really sits on a sliding scale of newness, defined by a combination of market newness, technology newness, as shown here on the diagram on the screen. So innovation that involves an existing market and an existing technology is incremental, for example, while the other end of the scale, a new market and a new technology, constitutes radical innovation. Now let's focus at individual incremental innovation, and we're going to go through each quadrant going forward now. We're starting here. So what is incremental innovation? This is actually the most common type of innovation. In this case, an organization is looking to increase its value to customers through addition or modification of features, functionality, or design. This means the innovation continues to serve an existing market and is based on existing technologies. In terms of cost, risk, and time to execute, this is a fail fast, fail cheap, low risk approach. However, it is not without risk. Organizations that place 100% of resource into only incremental innovation run the risk of missing other opportunities that competitors will capitalize on, or indeed could find that their entire business model collapses under the pressure of competitors' disruptive or radical innovations. So while this option is good for agility in terms of speed of deployment, it's not enough for companies to overcome the inevitable bump of the S-curve of innovation, which you see here, where it could be superseded by a new technology. Let's take a look at this in the case of mobile network technology. The chart here shows the latest data in evaluation of wireless mobile networks. As we can see, as the generation of the technology ages, the number of patent applications starts to decrease, and we can see the introduction of the next generation. Advancements in 5th generation, 5G, technologies began as early as 2011, although you can also see from the bars on the chart that 4G continued to grow overall share. It did, however, reach its own predictable point on the S-curve in around 2016. And at this point, organizations that were slower or not present in the 5G space will have already lost ground. So essentially, if you're wanting to be disruptive and innovative, you want your patents and you want your insights to be falling within this earlier stage of filing to give you more protection and more ability to protect, versus trying to come in when it's already been protected, much more mature, much more saturated, giving you less ability to prove novelty. So these trends must be watched and anticipated in order to find exactly the right moment to direct resources into the right technologies. Another way to investigate iterative innovation trends is by taking a look at countries that allow utility model patents, which is not an option in North America or the United Kingdom, but which is used elsewhere in the world, such as China, Germany, Japan, and Australia. The rights conferred by utility model laws are similar to those granted by patent laws, but are much more suited to what may be considered as incremental inventions. Therefore, how organizations use utility model patents in these territories can reveal information about how they are protecting their core technologies and their incremental innovations, which may differ from their approach to breakthrough innovations. Let's use innovation intelligence to demonstrate this. In this example, we'll use 2 word clouds pertaining to photography in Australia as a jurisdiction. The first word cloud comes from utility model patents only. The second word cloud from standard patents only. We can see from our word clouds that the incremental only type of patents focus on image, camera, display, and broad concepts such as video. In the full patents, however, generally, more specific references are made, such as references to materials or types of materials, including photographic material, silver halide, acids, liquid developer, and the like. So you can at a very high level understand the difference between a utility and a normal patent to really understand what is being referenced, such as LiDAR systems for utility patents. That's much more shorter versus a much more broad understanding of the diffusion transfer, electrophotography, etc. If we take the famous example of radical innovation and one of Netflix's core patents, US 6584450 is the one that we're going to be referencing. Apologies. So another way of determining incremental innovations versus radicals through citations. Jumped ahead a little bit. As a paper published by MIT, as you've been reading here on the screen, it's natural to assume that each incremental innovation will cite all previous innovations in its technology cluster. However, as the paper goes on to explore, a radical innovation tends to receive more citations, as well as more general citations. It will also be heavily represented among tail innovations, meaning among patents receiving the highest number of citations. For those who are not aware of what a patent citation is, it's the same as in a reference or scientific documentation. You need to reference when you file a patent any previous IP that exists that potentially could be explained as novel on your patent. You have to point back to your references via citations. And here we are back with this Netflix patent that I jumped ahead on. So we're using here US 6584450, method and apparatus for renting items. It was applied for in 2000 and it's due to expire in this year. And this patent has been cited by 284 simple patent families and 623 INPADOC patent families. And by definition, then incremental innovations are going to average out at the lower end of the citation count. There's a caveat to this, and that some time that elapsed for these trends in citations to occur. So assumptions would have to be checked to remove false positives, especially in terms of incremental innovation. But it is an indicator that we can look out for, and certainly then has a bearing on the perceived value of the patent. We'll take a look at radical innovation in a moment, but first let's consider architectural innovation. Architectural innovation involves taking an existing technology, but applying it to a new market. For example, memory foam, which first had its uses in medical equipment, can be leveraged for consumer goods. In this case, it becomes a mattress. And we can see that on the landscape pictured here, quite clearly with surgery and medical instruments, as well as miscellaneous furniture and household goods making an appearance. We can see, therefore, that creating landscapes of technology terms or areas can help to uncover these adjacencies, or indeed uncover adjacencies that other competitors may have already uncovered. And as you can see here, this is 10,000 patents that are making up this landscape. So manually trying to revise and look into 10,000 patents and lay them out in front of you based on classifications and keywords is a very cumbersome task. This is where big data analytics and a big data next generation system enables a lot of this ideation. Now the fun part, disruptive innovation. Disruptive innovation, sometimes called stealth innovation, refers to when we introduce a new technology or process, but it is based on the existing market. For example, we can consider the mobile phone market and touchscreens. In the mobile phone space, the application of the new technology, touchscreens, gave rise to the iPhone. Or in a more recent example, the rise of cloud and app store creates a company such as Uber to compete in the taxi market. And while it's important for organizations to look at disruptive innovations, as an article by Patent Informatics describes, electing precise patent allocation percentage for disruptive technologies is difficult. 3 well-known examples exist for employee time allocations to side projects and unorthodox innovations. So 3 examples are: first, Hewlett-Packard allows employees to spend 10% of their time on wild ideas. This led to the invention of HP printers. Second, the famously innovative company 3M, Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing, allows employees to spend 15% of their time to pursue other innovations. And this led to the invention of Post-it notes and completely differentiating them as an organization. And finally, third, Google allows employees to spend 20% of their time on projects that interest them, leading to 50% of the new products launched in the second half of 2005. Nevertheless, it is interesting that they have some structure around this. They have identified the need to quantify how much time a resource should be spent. We'll take a look later at how chances of success in terms of disruptive innovation can also be increased by taking a data-driven approach, not just in terms of internal targets, but how to use it within an innovation strategy that is supported by external data as well. Finally, radical innovation. So this is like the moonshot target. In many ways, as it creates new industries, it's based on revolutionary technology. For example, think about cloud architecture. Such a new emerging technology is the backbone for Netflix and the new areas of streaming movies and music, which then completely upends and replaces the physical rental model based on DVDs and spells the end of former household favorites such as Blockbuster Video. We won't go into this now, as we're considering data-driven approaches to radical innovation a little later in the webinar. So, with these types of innovation in mind though, big question, what types of innovation are you targeting? One exercise could be to take your innovation pipeline and determine the ratio of projects that sit within each quadrant. If you're focusing 100% on incremental innovation only, questions may need to be asked as to why this is the case and how this should be addressed, like an investment pot. You really want to be covering scenarios in all bases for the best chance of long-term success. Now, in reality, each definition overlaps to a degree. For example, there's always a pinch of incrementalism, even in disruptive innovation, and it's all part of a sliding scale rather than hard defined boundaries between each quadrant. However, each quadrant is synonymous with a level of risk, the opportunity to create new models, and the attractiveness to potential investors or partners. To uncover opportunities in each quadrant, as we see by the data you can see, you do need to take a different approach to the research and ensure that the pipeline and innovation has a healthy mix, even if you do not proceed with every idea straight away due to its potential risk of failure or potential disruption to the business. So this is actually a good point to start thinking about risk. What level of risk is acceptable? The different types of innovation have different levels of risk attached, ranging from generally low cost, low risk in the incremental innovation quadrant to high cost, high risk in the radical innovation quadrant. The tolerance for risk therefore needs to be decided at a corporate level so that the correct risk mitigation procedures could be put in place to match it to the innovation pipeline. And so the correct resources be made available for that mitigation. As most companies look for low risk, low disruption, and quickest wins, they favor incremental innovation, but this approach can leave them at a risk from the other quadrants. Each project should be designed, designated a quadrant, and the appropriate questions answered about risk appetite and resource allocation. But what are the potential risks of failure and points of failure? In terms of the innovation projects, the risk of failure can arise from a variety of different sources. This could include, but is certainly not limited to, not enough support in the organization. Maybe the organization is risk averse for previous experiences when it comes to innovative products entering new markets or partnering with different firms. The innovation can disrupt or cannibalize the organization's other revenue streams. So sometimes if you're going into something more radical and you're a legacy player in the space, there's a potential that you're going to create a new market that will cannibalize some of your core tendencies. The innovation requires new marketing and sales training, which is not made available, or there's no ability within the organization for that ability to bring in new marketing and sales training for budgetary reasons, potentially. It could also require new materials, resources, and knowledge that a company does not have. So how do we find this resource? How do we find this knowledge? How do we find these materials? And then finally, it's not known by the end user. So you have to find a way to educate or market this need to the user because you're creating an entirely new function, product, market, etc. So what level of risk is acceptable? Now, the innovation does not conform to legal frameworks or require changes in legislation. Self-driving cars would be an example, but in fact, any legislation-heavy industry needs to factor this risk into the equation. And this can easily be aligning IP data with steep or pestle analysis to understand if there's filing occurring in a jurisdiction that does have regulatory approval. Secondly, internal threats. What if an employee with knowledge of the riskier, unprotected innovations takes that knowledge elsewhere? You can look at Waymo as an example of that going through the court systems. And then external threats. What if a consultant engaged in answering some of the above questions leaks the information? What if some engineers or users within this project go out to a public data source and that gets taken and other users can somehow see the keywords that you're popping into a search bar, for example, and there they can infer what is being leveraged within an organization. Some of these questions can be used during the stage gate process, which itself is commonly used in the innovation process for mitigating risk. And here's a stage gate process here, for example. So for instance, we can see here that each stage of the process has a significantly different focus. But in each case, connected innovation intelligence, so this could be patents combined with legal data or new technology definitions combined with patents and scientific literature, could be used to answer questions such as, is this truly novel? Do we have freedom to operate? The questions and sources will vary according to the stage that we are at. We can see from the chart on the screen that the connected innovation and intelligence, so examples of which and how they relate to each stage, are provided in the boxes underneath. That connected innovation intelligence plays a role in each of these steps. Let's take these three examples: discovery and idea generation, business case and launch. For this use case, let's take the example of no-low beverages. So no alcoholic or low alcoholic beverages, which is a hot trend, probably one that most of us can relate to at the moment, unfortunately. So starting with discovery and idea generation, we first of all may want to focus on ideas for adjacent technology and gain an understanding of who's already in the space. We could do that using an intellectual property landscape, as per the example shown on screen, where we have Suntory, Kirin Brewery, Asahi, and Sapporo highlighted as some of the most active players in this no low alcohol space. By running a landscape and keyword analysis, so the words and the labels around the landscape, we find that most of the innovation is within a sector relating to low alcohol, health drinks, and fruit wines. And in some cases, by diving deeper, we can uncover areas for ideas that may not have been considered before. Or we can look to tackle a different issue, maybe the brewing process, or indeed taste improvement. The point is, a landscape can be a springboard for establishing new ideas. It is one of the ways that idea generation could be approached. We'll take a look at an innovation strategy into which this fits best a little later on. At a different stage in the process, we may have decided to explore an idea further. But what we need to create is a business case for consideration, part of which will involve determining market readiness. In this regard, again, connected innovation intelligence can be used. Let's start by firstly just considering the volume of patents on the left, and we have this combined with the trend for scientific papers on the right. In this case, patents show a decline in activity. However, interestingly, scientific papers shows an increase. We can interpret this in a couple of ways. Maybe everything obvious based on current scientific research has, by and large, been patented, making it more difficult to find something new and obvious to patent. On the other hand, scientific papers are accelerating their research, which could indicate new opportunities. On the other hand, at this point, we may also want to refine our idea based on closer scrutiny of the patents and papers behind the trend. Or we may develop our business case research further using more connected intelligence. For instance, maybe we would want to see what predictions on market size are being made for this space. At this point, we may want to assess whether the market size is large enough for us to be willing to take the risk on a certain technology. We can use our patent research alongside non-patent literature to reinforce our decision-making. With this example, a market of 2.5 million and a compound annual growth rate, CAGR, of 5%, we're better equipped to determine how attractive we find investing in the space. Of course, this process inevitably leads to the collection and review of vast sums of information and could create bottlenecks or duplication, as discussed at the beginning of the webinar. In this case, it is advisable to use some form of management process or tool to reduce this impact. For example, in PatSnap, it is possible to use a feature such as workspaces, an example being shown here, to collect information relating to specific projects and share with relevant user groups and across teams. This is especially important the more projects are being created and evaluated. The benefit of this approach is that engineers or innovators can create workspaces or collaborative research areas, which can be automatically updated with new information where required, while also being shared with other units such as IP and legal, so they can begin assessing information or understand the context before official requests are made. This makes the process less linear and can create an ongoing review status that dramatically speeds up the formal review stages, therefore creating less friction in the innovation cycle. The next big question is, what are the objectives? Each project should contribute to an organization's overall growth objectives, and this should be clearly defined at the outset for any engineers, developers, innovators, or product teams working on a specific project. The type of objectives are likely to be the usual suspects that we see here. So gain market share, contribute to revenue growth percentage, creating a new revenue stream. ROI is very important. The volume of IP, so maybe an organization could set a target number of patents to be filed or number of patents in a specific area, increase engagement internally, and then also pitch for a certain amount of investment with the data that you have in the back end. So depending on the type of innovation being targeted and the level of risk that is tolerated in combination with the objective or objectives, then different innovation strategies will be deployed to meet that aim. So remember the S-curve. As we explored, the S-curve is inevitable at some point in time, which means everyone needs an innovation strategy. But it is this link to specific stated objectives that is important. To use a quote, as Strategios clarifies in one of their articles, innovation strategy is a set of choices we make about how we allocate resources and develop our capability to achieve the growth goals of the business. Very important, these objectives. With the business objectives or objective in mind, we would need to address the following questions in order to assess viability. How can this help towards that objective? Is the level of risk appropriate to the outcome? So are you taking a disruptive level of risk to an incremental disruption to your product? How long will it take to develop? Is it short or long-term gain? You should use the risk questions and data to determine this. We have some organizations that feel it may take too long to innovate, to develop in-house, and they have the resources. They may go externally using patent research to understand who's already developed in that space and potentially partner or acquire that entity to speed up their innovation and accelerate their ability to disrupt. And then how does, very, very important, how does this disrupt existing business models? As we said earlier on, sometimes there's a risk that a new disruptive model, feature, product, market will cannibalize your more native and legacy products as well. And then in the end, how can this be managed? Once we have assessed the risk and determined the objective and the type of innovation within which the product sits, so iterative, architectural, disruptive, or radical, then we are in a better position to determine what innovation strategy may best be suited to support the success. The answer may be in the organization's current strategy is valid. However, the innovation type selected sits in a different part of the quadrant, then it is a chance to review and potentially select another. Innovation strategies and organizations may be built upon numerous methodologies. There are hundreds to choose from and potentially adapt to suit your organization as well. However, a handful of more common examples include the ones that we see here: agile, design thinking, double diamond, etc. Let's take 3 examples in which we have iterative, disruptive, and radical innovation objectives as desired outcomes, and see how a specific strategy can support these outcomes and the role innovation intelligence plays within that strategy. One option for iterative innovation could be based on a lean startup or lean enterprise methodology. This is based on the build, measure, learn cycle, which many of you may be familiar with, a more detailed version which is shown here. This is a detailed chart, which we won't go into in depth, but let's take one area, product market fit, surrounded there in red, right here in the middle within the resolve section of the cycle. Because, as we iterate, we will need to find potential customers or leads to carry out this product market fit research and measure how customers might react to your technology. When we look at finding these targets and experts, there are a number of ways of doing this. More traditional methods would include value chain analysis, who sits within the value chain, suppliers, distributors, etc. Social media, jumping onto LinkedIn to see who's an expert in the space, your own personal networks or professional networks, and blogs and research reports as well. Another way is to apply innovation intelligence and AI, artificial intelligence, which we have an example of here. If we use the example technology reverse osmosis membrane and PatSnap Discovery, an AI-driven platform can utilize its breadth of data, including tech blogs, grants, market research reports, and create a relationship map to quickly locate companies or experts active in this regard. Also, patent data could be used as an effective method of identifying target organizations. By using patent analytics and insights, for example, we can look at adjacent technologies through similar classification codes such as IPC and CPC codes. Then, from the assignee relationship, we can identify companies that are active or have an interest in the market you're targeting and where they sit in the ecosystem. And again, these insights are being drawn from hundreds of thousands to potentially millions of individual patent documents, and automated in a sense where the users can easily, quickly drill in a next generation format without having to go back and forth to try to get this detail from a more legacy style format internally. All right, next is disruptive innovation and TRIZ. So TRIZ is a Russian acronym right there, Teoria, that's the extent of my Russian, which translate as theory of inventive problem solving. It refers to a science-based rather than a psychology-based approach, such as brainstorming, to innovation. So again, this refers to a science-based rather than psychology-based approach, such as brainstorming, to innovation. It centers on defining an ideal end state and then analyzing the contradictions that prevent a product or solution reaching said end state. Today's products are the result of compromises based on available resource or materials, as illustrated in the diagram. The TRIZ methodology provides a framework for resolving the contradictions that lead to these compromises. It was actually devised by a patent examiner from the Russian Navy, Genrich Altschuler, who had reviewed 200,000 patents to try to determine what principles led to an innovative breakthrough versus an incremental improvement. In his time, he had to review these patents and evaluate them all manually. Fortunately for us, today, there are technologies such as artificial intelligence to not only help the process, but also to go deeper into detail and recut the information according to industries or technologies. One of the most compelling aspects of following this methodology is that in order to find the solution, it often involves having to find knowledge from other industries in order to solve an issue in another. One of the reasons space exploration, for example, is so fascinating is because it involves solving these contradictions, and often these solutions have practical applications in other fields. So in short, how is somebody else solving a similar problem than you in a different industry? Let's say, for example, in automotive, you want to increase the speed of your car. You can decrease the weight of the body by using thinner material, but by using a thinner material, you also decrease the level of safety of the car on impact. However, space technology already had some answers for this problem. Battery technology is potentially another area. You want to store more energy in a single cell, but you increase the risk of an explosion in the battery. Nearly every invention has to grapple with these contradictions. To quote an example from ScienceDirect in the electrical energy and storage system field, the basis of the used approach was a patent search involving 150 patents and patent applications in the EESS field. These patents were selected for relevance, i.e. the design of the battery's mechanical structure, cooling, electric contacting, or assembly. Each of these patents was analyzed in detail regarding the used inventive principles and the technical contradictions solved thereby. After aggregating all identified combinations into an EESS specific contradiction matrix, this matrix was compared to Altschuler's matrix to evaluate the success rate of the given principles in these matrices for solving high voltage battery specific problems. The main result is a ranking of the most used inventive principles in this field. The benefit of patents were moreover evaluating considering costs, lightweight, production, Hence, it was possible to create particular matrices and rankings for design tasks in these contexts. A first testing of these outcomes showed positive effects on the generated ideas and on the designer's comprehension. Again, this is from ScienceDirect. In the case of this methodology, the advantage of having a global patent database is paramount, especially as many innovative ideas may come from territories such as Japan, Korea, and China. Altshuler was confined to Russian patents when he first conducted this type of analysis. Indeed, for the more creative results, the wider the database global coverage, the more creative an answer you're likely to obtain. However, the volume of information being handled and the intricacy of evaluation mean that an ability to manage this process in a centralized research tool or PatSnap workspace is vital. Design thinking maps to the right box, top right box of radical innovation. See right here. That we showed in our first diagram earlier. What constitutes radical innovation is something of a billion-dollar question. You can see on the corresponding grid on the right that it is something of a discovery question, unknown unknowns. However, innovation intelligence can help frame the thinking around any discovery brainstorms. Consider, for example, again, an IP landscape. We have an example here considering transgenic plants and how these plants, represented by the colored dots, fall on the landscape. So each individual colored dot that you see on this landscape is an individual patent around transgenic plants. In this example, we can see in the bottom corner that there's a significant amount of white space. However, although we do not know specifically what is in this white space, we can triangulate ideas around the three sections to the left, right, and above. This triangulation is similar to the double diamond method, which is an off-sided tool within the design thinking toolkit. By examining the patents in each of the surrounding areas and by combining the concepts from two or more of these spaces, it is possible to predict inventions that may fit in the white space. With today's technology, it is also possible to then formulate a potential invention idea and use keyword and similarity analysis to predict where this new innovation falls on the landscape, which is indicated by the black triangle, which relates to some sample text in the box. So for example, within PatSnap landscapes, we're able to input an invention disclosure or an idea and then plot it within this space. And this invention idea disclosure could be built up based on the nuance of what's occurring around the space to discover what's happening here. And a lot of times we have a lot of users who come in and put in their idea and say, yes, it's operating within a white space. We want to pursue this. We want to understand what more is going there. And you can do it in a much more educated way by leveraging AI and machine learning to specify go or no go. And in the end, very, very important, governance, the next piece of the puzzle. Who is responsible? Of course, once we have decided the innovation type, the strategy, and the objectives, it needs strict governance in order to ensure success. This includes seeking answers to questions such as, who decides how many projects are going to be running? Are they in accordance with company goals and strategy? Who's responsible for auditing? Who's responsible for determining the level of risk a company is willing to take and then coordinating the policies around this? Who's going to take ownership of these risks? These are all very, very important questions, and organizations are going to make these decisions completely independent of their industry. You may have one organization that is company leading one, and then another organization that is company leading two, and their methodologies and the way that they operate are going to be completely different because they're independent of each other in terms of an industry, but they're going to operate the way that they believe is the best for this incremental, and governance is also very important with them. So obviously governance is the route to success for all of those IP legal attendees. You understand the risks associated with data and information sharing around intellectual property. So who's accountable for setting the objective? Who's responsible for the correct methodology? Who's responsible for managing the research associated with the projects? Is this on a high level or is it more on the IC, individual contributor level? Who's responsible for managing access to the information associated with research? You have some organizations where all information needs to go through legal. You have others who enable their engineers to access the information on their own. It really depends on your individual organization's methodology. And lastly, who is responsible for collating information and coordinating the workflow between these different teams such as R&D and IP? In short, as we can see from this example diagram, the process involves cross-functional decisions involving participants from right across the business, from C-level through to legal, product, research and development, business intelligence, and marketing. The need to access connected innovation intelligence and the research associated with it is valuable to all of the teams, but at different stages of collaboration. At the same time, though, the flows of information relating to the production of knowledge and how-to relating to each project or the creation of each IP asset needs to be monitored and managed. This could be achieved using tools such as collaborative project workspaces. And the example here we see is PathSnap Workspace, which we mentioned earlier. So in this case, each of these project areas represented by their icons could potentially relate to an idea with an objective, very important, within the organization, then annotated and shared across the teams for analysis at any point during the workflow. And we also know who has access to the collated information project, what was said, etc. Meanwhile, it is sensible to create a centralized collection of research so that effort is not duplicated when conducting non-patent literature research, such as the example we can see here on the screen, which is an example of a research pinboard within PathSnap Discovery. By adopting this practice, it is possible for cross-functional teams to review the information without having to start the research from scratch. And there's a central point of truth for all the research that has been carried out with regards to a specific innovative project. Duplication of effort, if that can be avoided, a lot of time can be saved on an individual level, which compounds to much time saved on an organizational level, just by understanding who has already seen something, having a conversation, and then taking that ideation, that knowledge transfer immediately versus finding further down the line that someone else has already gone down this path. So, final summary then. Our recommendation, therefore, would be to first of all conduct an audit of all the innovation projects and determine where they sit within this innovation type quadrant, alongside what you would want to target for each quadrant. It may look like something as shown on the graph represented by the dots here. Make sure that the targets referenced in the corners and the actual projects match the expectations as defined by the organization's objectives. It's worth noting that the organizations that have projects, or rather intellectual property, in each of the quadrants will be especially attractive to investors, as these can lead to additional or new revenue streams. For established companies, it provides an insurance against significant market changes. Meanwhile, if all your projects are incremental, then it is a chance to, after the audit, to make remedial action and not be left behind by fitting in just one of the quadrants. Next, decide the appropriate level of risk that the organization is willing to take, again, using connected innovation intelligence to help answer the questions with data-driven answers and knowledge. Then make sure that the correct innovation strategies are in place to support the creation of knowledge according to the innovation type being targeted. As shown, innovation intelligence can be used to create ideas and should subsequently be used throughout the screening process. Finally, ensure that each of the ideas are defined with objectives that relate to the overall goals of the business, and that these are measured and reported on. It is this approach that combines internally collected information and data, plus external information and data, plus the use of connected innovation intelligence, AI, machine learning, that can be shared across the relevant individuals in each business unit. That is key to creating a truly data-driven innovation structure and will be key for survival. I want to thank everyone for attending and open the webinar up to some Q&A, where my colleague Miriam will be helping.
Just give me a second. And also, for those who are on YouTube, please don't forget to drop in your questions on the chat box. So, John, allow me to shoot the first question to warm the attendees up. So if there's one takeaway, because intellectual property is quite an intricate matter, what is the one takeaway that our attendees can apply?
Yeah, I think one big takeaway is that a lot of times intellectual property is seen with fear because of the risks associated with the individual documents getting into the wrong hands, being mentioned, et cetera, around the legal risks.
Mhm.
But what is not understood, and I find, is the value of inferring trends and understanding on a high level what's occurring in a space with intellectual property data. A lot of organizations go through their business case analysis of market research, consumer sentiment trends, understanding specific environmental impact. Let's say if you're mining cobalt for batteries, but not many are looking into intellectual property to confirm or deny a lot of these trends. And the goal is, with this next generation and data driven insights, is to really leverage IP, which I find, and us at PanSnap feel, is a very unmanipulable data source because of the nature of intellectual property rights and the ability of examiners to set the classifications, etc. So the leveraging of this information is a great way to expand the knowledge, but also really pinpoint specific objectives that maybe potential competitors are leveraging to ensure that you are still front of line in terms of research.
Mhm. And how about your view on GDPR? Has it since the introduction of GDPR, has it been an issue with collecting, identifying who owns the data?
No, because patent documents are inherently a public document. The premise of a patent is that you are putting all of your technical information within the public domain for anybody to come in and say yes, no, and stop you from doing it. But by you doing that, it gives you the protection for 20 years to stop anybody from monetizing that. So for GDPR, it does not impact patent data. And I haven't seen any impact since GDPR has come in that regard.
Okay. Apparently we still have a very shy group here. The one question we get, which is a compliment for PatSnap, is they would like to have the your presentation be shared within the whole company.
Yeah, Jim, thank you. I'm more than happy to. And if you'd like, we can do a more nuanced and specific one for yourself if you'd like to contact us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm also looking in. It's also very quiet here on YouTube. Perhaps what we can do is to make everyone comfortable. Jean and Miriam, would it be good if I get all the attendees to send their questions? Perhaps it's because everyone's on public platform.
Yeah, of course. If people want to ask questions, more than happy to answer those privately if asked.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, are you on webinar or you on YouTube? Thank you for joining us in this journey of intellectual property for today. And thank you, John and Miriam, for the wonderful presentation. With hopes that today everyone has a deeper insight to how intellectual property matters in the field of R&D. So if you have any questions and if you would like to share today's presentation, I believe, Jean, you're fine with us leaving this presentation live on YouTube, so those who have missed it and those who would like to share can freely share.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So we look forward to hosting you again. And so once again, thank you for everybody's time, and we look forward to hosting you in our next series.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.